Andre, I'm really excited to speak with you. Can you give a little bit of background on yourself and maybe shed a bit of light on being one of the first 25 employees at Uber?
Started my career in investment banking. Don't hold that against me. I worked in M&A and debt capital markets in the US and the UK. I was more attracted to the founders on the other side of the table on those transactions, to be honest. And so I was trying to find my way to that side of the table. I swung the pendulum in the sort of second phase of my career all the way to the other side to try my hand at starting a company. And that company brought me to San Francisco and brought me to Silicon Valley, where we raised some money, we shipped a product, we got customers. It was all a bit of a drug to me. And I'm grateful for it because it introduced me to Silicon Valley, where I've built the rest of my career since 2007. While the company didn't work out, I was extremely grateful that it introduced me to this beautiful place. The third phase was basically me saying, how do I replicate that drug, if you will, of having this idea on paper, this ambition, and going on a journey? And so the short version of that was, for a decade, I joined 4 founders at the seed stage, and sort of grateful for the serendipity of the Valley, because that's how I got introduced to, the currency in the Valley is like introductions oftentimes. And so you do good work for someone, they introduce you to the next person, etc. And so, I joined 4 companies, and 2 of them worked out, and one was Uber. When it was called Uber Cab, and I was fortunate to be the 25th employee, and I was put in a expansion role, like an early expansion role called a launcher, which was the very first launcher for the company. And I launched Uber New York, Uber DC, and then Uber Canada. We can dive in more, but obviously that was a very pivotal moment for me that I maybe didn't even realize at the time. While the ambition that the co-founders communicated to me was infectious, and they had a unique thing going, and some really great people around the table. Most of my family and friends laughed at me when I joined a limousine service and really didn't understand what it could be. And I would argue many people at the company at that time didn't know what it could be. And so we didn't really know how consequential this company would be to all of our careers and to the world at large, in terms of the impact that it ultimately made.
So you're at Uber and Hired, which both, totally took off and became pivotal companies in their spaces, particularly Uber. And at Uber, if you just reflect back, what was that experience like? It was 25 people, 30 people, 40. What did you learn from that experience? What was the culture like? The people you were working with? Just fill me in.
Not what you would have imagined. Right? It's not what anyone would think of. And so to highlight a few things, right? Like sub 50 employees, everyone came from different backgrounds and experiences. As a launcher, our job was to not only get the service off the ground, but you had to hire the local teams that would persist in those markets and build those markets while the launcher would go to the next market. So I was in charge of hiring. There's this role called a general manager, which we often refer to as the CEO of the city. I happened to hire Uber Toronto's general manager, who is now Uber's most influential, longest standing executive 13 years later, is number 2 in the entire company, and he's a fellow Canadian. It wasn't probably until him that all of the GM's backgrounds started to look the same. But everyone pre him, the company took risks and chances and bets on a lot of people that you wouldn't have kind of imagined, didn't have sort of the quintessential resume that you would think you'd want to see at a startup. And in many ways, I characterize it as like everyone was an underdog with a chip on their shoulder trying to prove something. And it was like this beautiful canvas because it was so different. I mean, I'll give you a few examples. The community marketing manager in New York was a guy who had like famously lived in every borough in Manhattan or New York City, and had like the New York Times written about him. And we obviously wanted to light up the city with right. And so like, that's not the most traditional marketing person you would think of today to hire. Like, he's just not the right type of person, but he crushed it, right? That's like, as an example. And we often hired people based on what they could do versus what they have done. I have to just tip the hat to like the co-founders of Uber, because for their ability to see that versus what someone has done, because oftentimes people had not even worked in startups like at all. Like, this was their first startup job. So like, there's nothing you could look at to be like, oh, they get it. They know how to like figure this out. One sort of really standout example of the founder's ability to recognize that, even over the hiring manager, which I was to hire this person. This gentleman I mentioned earlier, that was the GM and the CEO of Toronto, in his final round interview which we sent him to San Francisco, I get a call midway through. Like, I know he's doing his final presentation. At first, I'm like, oh man, he might have failed. But I get this call, and Travis, we often refer to him as TK. TK said, I don't know how you found this guy, but he's going to go really far here. And like, for him to know that is special.
It's almost as if I'm hypothesizing here. I mean, you can look for, talent, and you can look at their resume and look for pedigree and different things. And, those can be great signals. But I think sometimes, and I think this is what you're referring to, there was a vibe, there was a feeling, there was a chip on this person's shoulder, a tenacity, whatever the heck you want to call it, that was like, man, this individual is not going to stop at anything and is going to go the extra mile.
And this was the culture. You ask about culture. At that time, and granted, it's important to note that I was there before hypergrowth. And so at that time, I would argue, in the sliver of the time I was there, people were mission aligned around this idea of providing an transportation alternative to a city. I remember Travis being like, we're not an app. Like, remove the word app from everyone's vocabulary. We are rolling out a transportation alternative to a city. And so the lesson I learned there was like, when you could elevate your startup to matter at a industry level, in our case, a city level, even well before it's a thing, like, it amps you up. You're like, I'm not just like building this app, like, I'm right. You ask also about challenges. I tried to launch Vancouver, right? And oh man, I haven't shared this story publicly, but I'll give you some tidbits. Okay, was in a co-working space in Gastown, a team of 3 or so, if I recall, and we went out to lunch, and we came back. And the other one of the companies was a security company, and as a way to test their product, they were filming the space continuously that we were in to test their product. And when we came in, it felt like everyone saw a ghost. Like, the vibe was weirdly strange. And they were like, look, we got to show you this video. Someone came asking for you. And I'm like, okay, why don't you just tell me? But okay. And they dramatically showed this video, and there's this dramatic pause that at the front door, and then all of a sudden this like 6'5", tatted out, wearing a white tank top with a bat in their hand,
Yeah.
came in saying, "Where are the Uber people? Get the F out of our city." Like, wait a second. Like, I just thought I joined an app, right? Let's just right. Wait a second. It was just, and so people ask, okay, like, Travis is aggressive or not. Like, every company needs a founder that's, we call it founder market fit, right? Like, there is no perfect archetype that's the same across the board. It depends on the business that you're in. Like, you needed someone like Travis to go up against what we were going up against, which most people didn't realize. and all these underdogs were like, we gotta like right a wrong in the world. This is wrong. We gotta right a wrong.
Often, or almost always, the most successful technology companies that change industries, that totally innovate, go up against resistance. People are resistant to change. Societies are resistant to change. If you're working in our space, the hope, the belief, has got to be that at the end of the day, after fighting through that resistance to change, there will be good on the other side by implementing, new solutions. And Uber changed an entire industry. Andre, that's a fascinating story on, your time at Uber and everything else. Eventually, you made your way to the other side of the table as an investor, and you are the founder and general partner of Maple Ventures. Can you fill me, the audience, in on what's the why behind Maple? What are you guys doing? What has you so excited?
So, yes, I mentioned 4 companies, 2 worked out. We talked about Uber, the other was hired. I noticed that both companies had Canadian founders. And specifically, when I say Canadian founders, they were founders who graduated from our amazing institutions, university. And I started to notice in any category, you will find one of the most important companies in that category will have founders who've graduated from or went to Canadian universities. To name a few: Uber, Slack, Instacart, Notion, Fair, Databricks, Cloudflare, Roblox, Moderna Health, and the most consequential company in AI today, Sam's former co-founder now, as of a few weeks, Ilan Saks, graduated from my alma mater, University of Toronto. I also noticed that none of them had Canadian investors on the earliest stages. Notice I didn't mention Shopify because that one's most obvious because everyone knows that one. But the thing that was surprising there as well was there were no Canadian investors on their seed stage at the earliest stages there either. And so that's when I asked myself in 2016, what if there was a fund that was waving the Canadian flag? And we could talk about the name Maple VC means more than the Canadian flag to me. But what if my unique insight was, what if this fund that's focused on Canadian founders was ironically not based in Canada? That was my, the twist. I think everyone needs to have a unique insight. That was the part that was different, that really resonated with me. And that's because I asked myself, if I was positioned outside where I am, Silicon Valley, could I see the cohort of people, call them Canadian expats, that are coming this way and tend to go build just the list of companies I just mentioned in the last decade, that they might lead me to the promised land, is effectively what I believed. But then by being positioned in Silicon Valley, i.e. outside of Canada, I actually might see the best inside Canada, i.e. the next Shopify. because history has also shown in that scenario at the earliest stages, those founders want an outside perspective on their cap table as well. And the thesis was really that, like, and I couldn't have articulated as clearly as I can now, but I deeply believed in the quality of talent coming out of our educational system. In fact, I'll say this. I think Canadian schools are Ivy League quality schools. We can go toe to toe with any student or graduate or talent coming out of Ivy League educations in the US. But we are not perceived that way. The Canadian schools are not perceived as Ivy League quality education when you come to the US, that's for sure. And the one example I had of this was when I got hired in investment banking, back then. I was hired in a class of 100 analysts. I was the only Canadian out of 100 hired at the bank. And no one had heard of the University of Toronto, sadly, in 2004. And so what did that do? All of my peers and managers discounted me because there was no proxy for them to sort of shape their understanding of the quality that would come out of my work. So the only way that I could compete, and it was extremely competitive, against the Yales and the Harvards and the Penns, and like that's who the Browns that I was up against.
I assume you simply had to crush it.
Correct. You just have to. And so what I've noticed is Canadians have to compete on their work product. They can't compete on a resume to resume basis. We will not win. And I love the love that Waterloo is getting these days in Silicon Valley. But even still, you put up that Waterloo grad on a resume basis against a Stanford grad. I'm sorry, most people are taking the Stanford grad, unfortunately. And so when you compete on work product, like that's everything. It takes longer. You've probably had to go through way more walls. You've had to go through more no's. You have to be pretty efficient to get there. Like the grit necessary to ship a high quality piece of work, whatever that piece of work is like everything in entrepreneurship. Like that's what it is about. And I felt that I could underwrite that faster than my competitors in Silicon Valley because of a shared lived experience. I was overlooked and underestimated most of my life. And so it was just, I could just notice it faster. That was effectively the thesis, which is backing Canadian founders building in the US. And the unique was like, we're the only Silicon Valley fund doing this. Like that's why it's unique.
It sounds to me like there's conviction that, there's a unique gritty component to Canadian founders. And you mentioned, from your times at Uber, those first 25 folks, there was a grittiness to that group, pulling all the threads together, your thesis behind Maple, Uber. You talk a little bit about investing in durable companies. What does that, out of curiosity, what does that mean to you? How do you identify that? What does that mean?
I'll connect this to the name. Okay, so the name of our firm is Maple VC, and it's deeply symbolic. It draws from inspiration from the maple tree, okay? And it represents a few themes that I'm not sure many people actually know. Obviously, the first, it symbolizes Canada, right? Maple leaf representing national identity, boom. And I just mentioned we focus on investing in founders with Canadian roots.
I'm based here in Toronto, calling Toronto. There's the hockey team, the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's not a symbol for Maple Venture. I'm not a Leafs fan, so happy that that's not a part of the inspiration. But anyways, continue.
Fair. The second, though, is that the maple tree signifies strength, endurance, and resilience. When you look it up, actually look up the maple tree. The maple tree tends to thrive in very diverse, often harsh weather environments, and it grows tall and strong over many, many years. And when we landed on this name, I was like, man, we just talked about a few of these traits. These are the traits that are essential for the most successful founders in the world. I couldn't find another name symbolic of like the traits that we actually look for, right? Particularly the piece that like is resilient and endures during like harsh weather environments, and I listed all the great names that we talked about. The two that I don't list, by the way, but maybe I should start listing it. Like Ilan went to Queens. I just want to throw that out there to the audience. He didn't graduate from Queens.
You're not referring to this Ilan. You're referring to the Elon with a little bit
That's
of deeper
right.
pockets.
That's right.
Yes,
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And Tesla and SpaceX, are category defining companies. And so I do believe if someone's just touched our educational system in one way or another, it's going to have a influence on your life. It's just whatever, like it's going to influence your life. The other thing I will say is in many of the companies I just listed, oftentimes the Canadian co-founder in many of the companies I rattled to you, it's the technical person, right? In Uber case, it was Garrett Camp, who was the Canadian, and Travis. For OpenAI, it's Ilya Sutskever, who built the thing, chief scientist, and then Sam. And there's so many of those examples where the Canadian one is the technical one. And I think that's, again, highlights the quality of education.
The University of Toronto, Waterloo, University of British Columbia, McGill University, these are like phenomenal computer science, software engineering programs. It's funny, I thought when you were going to say, Maple Ventures and what does Maple mean, and got into like a tree and, strength and growth and everything else. I don't know if you know, but my name, Ilan, in Hebrew means a strong tree. So,
oh my God, that's awesome.
There you go. So
that's awesome.
There's the fourth reason why it's Maple Ventures.
I love it. Well, here's the third. This one is also not as well known. The maple tree grows. It's found in Asia, Europe, Africa, North America. And I guess I've always found my demeanor, myself, to be like a global citizen. We started the call off like I live at the moment in Seoul, South Korea, where I'm calling you from. And so I wanted to be an internationally minded venture firm that is committed to tapping into like the best talent and opportunities worldwide, but with this unique thread of like following these Canadians that tend to go to these places, mainly the US, but when they go there, they tend to be the best in their field. And so, while Sequoia got the best, tallest tree in California, I got the tallest, strongest tree globally.
There you go.
and so that's it. Tells you everything about my ambition. The name.
That's awesome. That's great. I love that, Andre. So Maple Ventures, the way I understand it, is you come in pretty early. Like sometimes when you're making an investment, these are teams of 2, 3, 5, 7. There might be certain occasions where, it's a little bit further along, but help, demystify how you identify, in your process, who are you going to actually invest in for your portfolio? Because I assume you get pitched all the time. You see tons of deal flow and tons of amazing entrepreneurs. How do you ultimately, what's the common thread here from a talent perspective? What are you looking for? What's the DNA of these small early teams?
You're constantly refining this process, right? What is the product of a venture firm? It's the decision-making engine. That's really what it is. So I'm happy you asked, and we're constantly refining it. But here's where I stand at the moment to answer that question. It comes down to three main things. There's a lot that goes into like evaluating the idea, and like there's a bunch, but I'm not going to go into those tactics. Those are the three overarching themes, especially as it relates to the people, are One is ambition. It sounds pretty simple, but it's tough to fake ambition. And it needs to be big. The reason it needs to be big, and sometimes it grows over time, so it's not as like clear. So you get to know people. Like what's really at the core of like how big, what's driving them. So, there's not one archetype of someone that just comes out and wants to be super big. Like it could be. But the reason it needs to be really big is because the journey is like long and windy, and you're going to go through harsh weather environments. And like it needs to be worth it, big enough that like, well, how you end up there might not be where you started. And that's okay. Because I'm not investing in necessarily the like execution of it. That's too risky in my opinion. That's for later stage investors. You can underwrite that. But like I'm investing in this, like, how big is the ambition of this journey that we're about to enter? So that's one. The second, you have to have a unique view of the world. There has to be an insight. I told you mine for Maple, and I kind of shared my ambition too, right? And it usually needs to be misunderstood by most. Even with my venture firm, I've been rejected so many times by Canadians, ironically, because they don't get it. They don't get it. And then definitely rejected by Americans because they definitely don't. Wow, I don't see it. And that just fueled me because I'm like, oh, that gave me energy to be like, oh, I actually remember what that felt like when I joined a limousine service and people didn't get it either. Right?
Yes.
So you need to believe something that other people do not believe. And that's the second thing I try to uncover. And then the third thing, I think generally there needs to be a new way of doing something. When we're talking about technology investing, what's the old world business that you're going to reinvent and do in a new way? What is that? And when looking back to Uber and now some of my wins in the portfolio, it really kind of came down to those three things. Quick examples, right? If you look about Uber, the vision that was communicated to me so early when I asked, what's the ambition? What's the vision? The answer was, we want to deliver people anything. We want to build a logistics engine for a city. It's a unique insight. It's going to start with a black car that takes you from point A to point B. And then what's the new way of doing this? Well, before you couldn't touch a button on your phone and get the black car. So that's the new thing that we're doing. I had this company called Clay, which was the first check-in in 2017. 2 McGill grads who built this in New York. That's just taking off in a big way. And I think back to that first investment and why? Because it's like a 7-year overnight success. These things take a long time. And his ambition was, we want to make programming accessible to all. And he had convinced me that there's not going to be enough boot camps that are going to train enough engineers. And keep in mind the context. In 2016, I was working at a company called Hired, which was trying to place engineers. And there were tons of boot camps trying to level up a population to be to have more engineers in the world. And so it was pretty contrarian.
Ambition, a unique insight. You have to there needs to be a belief that many others don't believe, or something that they see that others don't see. And Andre, I know that you're passionate about talent. You've talked to me a little bit about zeros, ones, and twos. Can you, fill others that are listening into this on what that is? What does that mean? What are zeros, ones, and twos?
So you could think about it in 3 buckets. I just happen to code it by those to make it easier for me to codify because it's something that I try to underwrite when investing. But the labels are really, I think there are 3 archetypes in tech, which are inventors, builders, and operators. And I believe you need all 3 in order to build a consequential durable company that stands the test of time. However, who is the person that's starting the whole thing is quite important, because there are steps to building a company. Let's just assume those steps are 0 to 5. An inventor feels like they're really good at the 0 stage. Let's call that the prototyping stage. They're also really good at inventing the future. That's why they're inventors. So you could say that they're really good at like step 5. Let's call step 5 the sort of vision is kind of realized the future. You've brought the future to the present. A builder, however, but builders are really good at going from 0 to 1 with this unique insight that they have generally, and that most people don't understand. They're also really good at painting the picture, because I've talked about the ambition, of what step 5 could be. And it really captures your imagination, I have found. Operators, on the other hand, are really good at the steps in between, as the name suggests, right? They're really good at executing. Give them step 1, tell them go to step 2, 3, and 4. Get me to 5. And everyone has their strengths, and you kind of need them all. But here's the trick. All people, we are all attracted to people like ourselves, whether we like it or not. It's just human nature. So if you are starting a company and you're in the inventor bucket, you often attract other inventor types. So let's just imagine though, if you don't have a 1 in the mix, the builder, and you only have the other ends, guess what step you missed out on? You missed out on step 1. and you could build something amazing, and people often acquire those archetypes, and like people can make a lot of money, and that's great. But I don't generally see that those companies become enduring and durable over a really, really long time.
Yeah. So if I think of Apple, Steve Wozniak,
inventor. Steve Jobs is the builder.
You're one.
And Tim is the operator.
Yeah.
Correct.
100%.
And sometimes they come at different stages, let's say, but it's like really important that the builder gets you from 0 to 1. Like that combination is the 0-1 combination. The 2 sometimes comes later. And that's okay. Sometimes it's there from the beginning. That's cool. But you get like the PayPal mafia when you have a bunch of builders. Right. And so really importantly, maybe lastly, the unique aspect I've found about a builder is that they somehow have this unique ability to attract the inventor and the operator to join them on their journey.
Where inventors and operators they have a more difficult time attracting others.
They don't attract the builder. It never goes the other way around. That's for sure. And so I got to feel this at Uber. The amount of, I alluded to it a little bit, but the level of diverse talent around the board in the early days was like something I had never seen before. How did this person attract all of these strange, diverse, we had a math department with PhDs in that, like, to like these crazy executors coming out of like Bain and McKinsey to the nomad, like, it's like, that's special, dude. Like, that's really special. And so you can get inklings of that early through advisors. Again, it's hard. I'm never going to get it right 100% of the time. But that's what I'm looking for, is effectively builders that have that ability to build and capture imagination with an ambition, have a unique insight, and frankly, can show signals that they can attract the necessary talent needed to take this the entire way.
Amazing. One final question. Is there any advice you have for founders building their teams in the early stages?
What I think about on that framework is introspection. Who are you in that framework? Because here's another trick, maybe the second trick to the question. Everyone's actually a builder. It just depends on the context at what you're building. As we've mentioned in my story, I was not the builder for the tech startup I tried in 2006, unfortunately. And then I ended up realizing that I'm an operator in the context of the companies I joined. But I have realized I'm a builder in the context of building Maple VC. And I've just seen the kinds of people I've been able to attract to want to work with me on this journey. And I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like to be a builder. Like, you just got to find your thing. And by the way, this can happen inside companies. There's many builders, many inventors, many operators inside companies that, like, you can build a little product group and make sure you have each of them on your team, because that product group is going to endure over a long period of time if you do have these archetypes. And so I just like apply the framework, like, continuously to building teams.
Context and fit is a key component. I mean, from a talent perspective, we're placing talent at venture-backed tech startups, and, an amazing software engineer in one environment with one culture, with a certain team, a certain vision, it's not guaranteed they're going to be as productive in another environment. I mean, there might be some good signals and whatever else, but fit and context is a huge part of it. And Andre, what's next for Maple?
We get excited about chasing these Canadian expats, and the vision has always been that these Canadians building in the US are going to get us into some really important companies. And then those companies or networks are going to matter to a larger swath of founders. And that's how we build, right? Like we're going to do our Uber X eventually. Today it's Uber Limo, but we're going to get there. And so I guess the one specific thing I'm really excited about, I've been recently appointed executive fellow at Harvard Business School. To note, I did not go to Harvard Business School. And so it's an honor and a privilege.
Very cool.
But I got there because of a Canadian expat founder who built a business, a very big one in the US, and happened to be my professor 20 years ago. It also kind of brings this all together because it shows he effectively taught me the same thing 20 years ago at my school. Now he's being asked to teach it at Harvard Business School. Like, our schools have Ivy League quality education, but like people don't get it or know it yet, right? And the class happens to be a class dedicated to founders. And so yours truly is going to be the very first VC that any HBS graduating founder will get to meet. And
that's awesome.
I'm excited about that network that I didn't have before. That, like, again, I owe it to this unique strategy, my unique insight that is opening up these networks that, I'm excited about what they're going to build. And so that's one example.
What an honor to be able to do that,
cool.
And to impart, everything you've learned on to, the next generation of founders. Andre, this was awesome. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
We will certainly speak soon.